This man has a special fetish. His favorite dish is the raw human flesh. Just a thin layer of salad oil. And a pinch of sea salt to taste. A delicious meal is ready. And if you're a regular meat eater, you'll know. Women's meat tends to taste more delicate. But there is a special ceremony before the meal. The man must wear a special mask. In order to be worthy of this rare delicacy, turning around for a moment, to find the woman has disappeared. The director of the Inn of Human Skin, Eli Roth, for Thanksgiving. For Thanksgiving, the story begins. On Thanksgiving night, Bob, a cop, comes to join his friends. But his friend Mickey gets an emergency call. The mall was overflowing with customers. He had to keep order. But Bob wasn't sure, so he went with him. And the mall was really crowded. White and Jessica were 6-1. Because Jessica's father owns the mall. They entered the mall early. The storm will open in 10 minutes, but White doesn't know how to stop. He kept on provoking and provoking. It was an instant outrage. Customers pushed down the railing. They all crowded into the mall. This is how the tragedy began. The glass door was instantly broken. The manager was pushed to the ground with the door. The crowd kept stepping over it. Someone was pushed against the glass. They cut their necks on the spot. And Mickey's wife, Amanda, was knocked to the ground. And Whitey, he's just trying to make a mess of things, still holding up his cell phone and taking video. And the Thanksgiving Day sale prices. On Thanksgiving Day, the low prices had the crowd in a frenzy. Jessica's boyfriend, Curly, saw the janitor fall to the ground. He wanted to save him, but his arm was broken by a foot. Richie's wife was hit by a shopping cart. She died on the spot. It was out of control. Bob fired a warning shot. That's what stopped the riot. News coverage of the mall incident began to pour in, and condemned it. But the owner of the store, Whitey, was still making a living, and still made a good living, during a commercial shoot. I realized that the props had been destroyed. The axe on the wall had disappeared, but no one took it seriously. Unbeknownst to them, the axe was about to become the scythe of death. It's a madman who harvests lives. The mall tragedy was forgotten. Thanksgiving was just around the corner again. Jessica and her 6 friends suddenly received an unfamiliar message with a picture of a table. It was a photo of a table. They were so relaxed. They put it out of their minds, but they didn't know it was the signal for the killings to begin. Auntie Fatty, the waitress, is off duty. He took the clothes and was ready to leave. A masked man appeared out of nowhere and pinned him to the wall. Annie called out loudly, but a razor cut her palm. Then he was pressed into a pool and dunked in a water bottle. Finally, he was pressed against a cold storage door. The hypothermia immediately stuck to the wet skin. The fat lady screamed. The masked man raised his killing axe. In the heat of the moment, the fat lady tore her skin. That's how he survived. But he had just escaped from the restaurant. A car came barreling down the road and cut him in two. What's worse, the murderer left his body hanging in front of the mall. Instantly ignited the public's panic. Xiao Bai and the others received unfamiliar news again. The photo is the body of the fat lady. What's even more horrifying, Jessica found the photo on the table. With their nameplates on it. It seems that they were targeted by the murderer. They immediately went to the police station to report the incident, but the police were at a loss. The only clue they had was, the murderer seems to be targeting the mall. The person who witnessed the stampede. The security guards at the mall. Fatty knows this very well. He was about to go out for shelter, but before he left, he suddenly heard a noise. He looked around, but found nothing. He turned around and found a mask sitting on the couch. Fatty immediately counted down with his hair on his head. He grabbed his bat. He looked around nervously. The cat in the kitchen tilted its head. The stranger seemed to be hiding there. Fatty took one step closer, but a sharp blade came out from under the table and plunged it into his belly. The masked man took out a wire and strangled him. Then he turned around and cut off Fatty's head with a single blow. He looked at the poor kitten. He was afraid it would starve. The masked man grabbed a large amount of cat food for him. Then he brought the kitten home and put it on the table. And the next day, Jessica woke up and received this photo. Chai immediately pinpointed the location of the person according to the IP of the account, but the address was a vacant lot. The police had to find another way. Since they couldn't find the murderer, they had to find the next victim. Bob called Curly and Jessica. They told him that the man who led the charge into the mall that day is called Danny. He was a fitness instructor, and while they were talking, Danny had been called out by his girlfriend. Obviously he wanted to have some fun. The girl sat Danny down, and she climbed up on the trampoline. And he's bouncing, Danny. But the mask suddenly appeared and snapped his neck. The girl didn't know anything about it. She was still bouncing. She didn't realize the hunter was under the trampoline, unable to stop. The girl was smashed into a sieve. She died on the spot, vomiting blood. The situation was worse than ever, and they couldn't even scratch the killer. Bob came to the school immediately. Bob came to the school right away and told Jessica to stay together, and not to go alone. But White, always the rebel, he grabbed his girlfriend and headed down the hall. And he never came back. Then Jessica got a text from White. She asked him to come over. Jessica thought it was weird, but when she saw the police outside the door, he went over there. He called out for a long time, but no one answered. Finally, he found White's cell phone in a trash can. Jessica picked it up immediately, but the masked man approached with an axe. But Jessica turned off the screen. She saw the masked man's face, ducked her head to avoid the fatal blow. Then she ran for her life. He escaped. He became the only survivor of the masked man. For safety reasons, Blake and Jessica filled their guns, but the masked man was getting crazier and crazier. While the girls were video chatting with Jessica, the masked man was counting. He even greeted the camera in a casual manner, and then hung up. Blake immediately freed the swimmers. He finally got there in time. A confrontation ensued, and in the video of the masked man's accident, White and his girlfriend had been kidnapped by him. Jessica was a little desperate for help, but she didn't want the masked man to turn on the chainsaw, and threw the girl up. In the teeth-chattering sound of cutting, the girl was disemboweled on the spot. She died. It was a shock to Blake and Jessica, and they were about to face another decision. Thanksgiving is coming up. Whether or not to hold the parade, it's an urgent decision. But Jessica thinks the parade has to happen, because on Thanksgiving Day, the masked man will be out and about. This could be the best chance to catch the masked man. Jessica's idea was supported by her parents and the police. They started to implement it right away. But whether the masked man will show up on that day, it's still Jessica's guess. Jessica, the heroine, scanned every person in the crowd, looking for the murderer. Suddenly, a mysterious man in a mask caught the heroine's eye. Just as they were about to arrest him, the masked man suddenly rushed out and stopped the caravan. He held up a protest banner. Turns out he was a victim of the mall incident. The protesters were quickly removed by the police. The pop caravan began to move on, but a clown got in the way. Suddenly, he swung his axe and cuts down the king. The scene was a mess. The police told Jessica and Blake to get in the car. They were about to drive away, but he was shot down. Joker's got a concussion grenade to clear the way. He put a shot of anesthetic in everyone. Then he took advantage of the chaos and drove away. And that's how Jessica and her family got caught. Dahmer was the first to wake up, but to his horror, he found himself tied to a table. The masked man was painting his face with oil. He pretended to be unconscious, but he was waiting for a chance to escape. When the masked man wasn't looking, Dummy quietly hid. In the midst of chasing and escaping, he hid in the corner, but he was only one step away from the masked man. Damn, I held his breath. Inside his heart, he prayed, "Don't let the masked man find out." Suddenly, a body appeared on the side. He was so scared that he almost made a sound. Maybe the prayer worked. The masked man turned away from the alarm clock. He turned around and left. Homie found a way to escape upstairs. She found that all the windows were sealed tight. Opened the refrigerator. There was a man hiding inside. Dummy didn't have time to be surprised. She realized he was still breathing. Dummy hurriedly covered his mouth. She was afraid that the masked man would hear the noise. For safety's sake, Dummy ruthlessly closed the refrigerator door. But soon the mask came after her. Dummy hid behind the wall. She didn't dare to breathe. With a bottle in her hand, she waited for an opportunity to take action. But the next moment, the fork went straight through the wall. Dummy turned around and ran for his life. As he pushed open the door and was about to escape, the masked man threw the fork and plunged the gas straight to the ground. Amidst the wailing, the woman was dragged back to the house. He was tied up and put in the oven. In despair, he lost consciousness forever. Gratitude is all in the line of duty. A million people in the streets, a public killing. The masked man's arrogance shocked the national media. They've criticized him, and the police finally pinpointed an address. Masked man also arrogant to the extreme. He went so far as to start a live webcast, real-time broadcast of his crimes. But he also exposed his IP address. Countless police officers swarmed to the place. Finally, in a basement, they found a cell phone that was broadcasting live. But unfortunately, the cell phone was only broadcasting what was on the screen. The masked man's real hiding place is somewhere else. And right now, Jessica and her family and friends were gathered together, just like last year on Thanksgiving night. But all they could think about was fear. Because Jessica's mother, replaced the Thanksgiving fire engine, which lay in a grotesque position on the dinner table. And the tragedy was far from over. Every single person that the masked man took out had their heads laid out on the table. The masks made wine out of blood, for a feast from hell. The next moment, the masked man began to take revenge. He walked up to Xiaobai. He went straight up and hit him with a hammer. And it's all being broadcast live. Like a cat with a mouse. He's going to slowly torture each and every one of them to death. Jessica, not willing to sit still, rubbing his ring against the twine. And when he finally cut the twine, he handed the ring to Blake. Blake broke free, and immediately threw the chair at the masked man. But the masked man then grabbed an axe. Blake saw that he was outmatched. He took Jessica and ran for his life. They ran for cover, and they found out a shocking truth. It turns out that the masked man's lair, it's the same place where the advertisement was filmed, in order to cover Jessica's escape. Blake bravely fought with the masked man, but he was cut in the arm. He fell to the ground in pain. The masked man wanted to kill him. He left Blake and chased after Jessica. But at the last moment, Jessica managed to climb over the fence, luckily escaped. On the way to escape, Jessica saw a police car, and a long dead cop was lying on the ground. Jessica immediately grabbed her gun. He was ready to turn around and rescue his parents. And when he returned, he saw the masked man take off his mask. The murderer was his companion, Curly. Jessica was shocked and stunned. A man suddenly embraced him. It was Bob. When he heard that the murderer was Curly, Bob decided to pursue the murderer alone. After several gunshots, Bob came back alone. Because Curly was lost, a large number of police officers immediately began to search for him. Jessica's friends and family were finally rescued. But Jessica was in a state of shock. Bob was there to comfort her. But just as Bob got up to get his things, Jessica was shocked to realize his pants and shoes were identical to the masked man's. Jessica's heart raced, but she could barely keep it a secret. But even so, Bob realized what was going on. He closed the door immediately and began to make preparations to kill him. But Jessica never understood why Bob became a masked killer. It turns out that what drove him to his killing spree was the loss of the love of his life. And the love of his life was Mickey's wife, Amanda. Amanda and Mickey had been broken up for a long time. And then she fell in love with Bob. But before their love could bear fruit, she died on Thanksgiving night. Bob was devastated. Decided to kill anyone who had anything to do with Amanda's death. For Amanda's sake, Bob Kanka talked about it, as if he'd won the war. But what he didn't know, Jessica was already on the air. The truth that Bob was the masked man was already known to everyone. Bob was furious and pressed Jessica to the ground. He wanted to kill her right away. But then a crozier flew through the window, and it hit him right in the face. It was Curly. Curly broke through the window. He took Jessica and got out of there quickly. But the rainstorm, already in a frenzy, came after him. Curly wanted to drive away, but inadvertently overlooked the steel cable behind the car. As the speed of the car increased, the cable tightened rapidly. They couldn't move any further, and Bob's leader, Hatchet, was closing in. It's a matter of life and death. Jessica starts loading the old shotgun with powder. Bob is close. Jessica lifts the shotgun, But he's not aiming at Bob. He was aiming at the giant balloon behind him. As Bob looked on in despair, the balloon exploded and burst into flames, and Curly was free of his shackles. As Bob screamed in agony, the two of them flew away and finally escaped with their lives. Soon after, the fire department arrived, but they didn't find Bob's body. Instead, a man in a fire suit came out with a hammer. That day, Jessica woke up from a deep sleep to get a glass of water. She was startled by a noise, and then a fire appeared. Jessica was carried straight into the fire, but luckily, it was a nightmare.